Okay, got the comment pinned, ready to go. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrian from Beautiful Brain Collective. I'm a mental health advocate and blogger. I help women discover that they can also live their best lives despite having a mental health condition. I was diagnosed back in 2014 with bipolar disorder and also generalized anxiety disorder. And so for the first couple of years of the diagnosis, I was very closed off and very not open to talking about it. But for the last, I would say 2.5 years, I've been really on the path to recovery and making this diagnosis work for me, and learning how to cope with the diagnosis and how I would be able to still do all the things that I wanted to do and still do all the things that I needed to do despite having a mental health disorder. So what I wanted to talk about today was actually a component of bipolar disorder, the mania side of bipolar disorder, because bipolar disorder has two components. One is the depression and the other one is the mania. So they both cause extreme shifts in mood, and not just like, oh, I'm feeling sad today, but like really extreme shifts in mood. So everybody gets sad, everybody gets happy, but in the case of this illness, it is a really extreme case. So a depression may last for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and it can be debilitating. Also, on the flip side of that, the mania is not just a normal happiness or excitement. It's really enhanced. It's really over the top. So I wanted to talk about that aspect of bipolar disorder, just to kind of give some context and just basically share my experiences with that portion of the illness. So I just briefly wanted to just say that I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but what I'm bringing to this conversation is my experience, and I've been dealing with this. I was diagnosed back in 2014, but research has shown that people who have, bipolar disorder and things like that are predisposed to the illness, and sometimes a traumatic event will kind of set the wheels in motion for the symptoms and for the illness to show up. So my experience is my teacher, and that's what I share with everybody else. So like I said, I was diagnosed back in 2014. Once I learned about the symptoms and how the illness worked, I could see all along that the symptoms were there, but I didn't know what they were. I thought for a long time it was just part of my personality, and not quickly, but over the years, I learned that it wasn't just a part of my personality. It was actually a part of the illness. It was a part of the illness showing up and showing itself. And that's what I would see in different situations and scenarios. So mania is an extremely elated and excitable mood, usually associated with bipolar disorder. And it's something where it's more than just having energy. It's like energy times 100. It's the feeling of euphoria. It is, you're full of energy, full of energy. Sometimes you don't need sleep. People, they don't sleep for days on end, and that's one of the main telltale signs that may be a part of mania, is when a person is not sleeping. So racing thoughts, irritability, hypersexuality, increased talking, but with the increased talking, it's rapid talking and trying to get your words to keep up with your brain, because your thoughts are racing, and then you're trying to translate that into your speech. So it's just, everything's going really fast, and you're trying to keep up as you're speaking with the the quickness of your thoughts. So your thoughts are going, and then you're trying to talk and get everything out, and it causes sometimes it causes communication problems and a disconnect in communication, and stuff like that. Um Another sign of mania is engaging in pleasurable activities, but also activities that can be dangerous. There's really a lack of discretion. There's really a lack of discretion when one is engaging in these activities. So, like I mentioned earlier, I mentioned hypersexuality. I didn't mention, but gambling is another thing. Um, Spending money. A lot of people during mania, will engage in drug use and alcohol use. So that's another thing that can happen when a person is in a state of mania. Now, this doesn't mean that this happens for everybody, but this does happen to some people. And these are some of the symptoms and signs that I'm talking about, are symptoms and signs that I have personally experienced myself. um Impulsivity, I hope I'm saying it right. So you're very impulsive with little regard to consequences. So um you may get an idea to do something, and you just go ahead, and without thinking things through and thinking about what the consequences are, you just go ahead and do that, and you kind of worry about the consequences later. If you max your credit card out $20,000, you don't really think about it right then and there when you are in the moment and you're swiping, but you worry about that later once the bill comes, and you owe all this money. So um, being impulsive is a really big sign. I know, at least for me and some of the other people that I've talked to, and some of the research that I've done, that impulsive nature is a hallmark sign of mania. So that's a big one. Um, I mentioned inappropriate behavior before. Um, that's another sign that a person may be, in the throes of mania. Um, Rage, paranoia, or delusions. There is a thing called bipolar rage, but the rage is like, it is amplified. The rage is amplified. So it may be, a person will go into a fit of rage over something that's so small and seemingly innocent. But when you're in the mania and everything seems to be enhanced, one small thing could send the person over the edge. And I know personally I've experienced that. So um, that is another sign. And delusions, um, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say, I think that maybe when you think about delusions, you think about you are believing things that aren't true, or you're thinking things that aren't true, and also paranoia. Those personally I haven't really dealt with, but this was something that I came across in my research, so I just wanted to put that out there as well. So um a couple of the possible triggers for the mania. um as we know, this is a brain disorder, so, and this is an illness, so the symptoms could come and go without warning. But what we know is that you can do things to kind of prevent them or kind of maintain the illness, so that, you know, the manic episodes or the depressive episodes will be kind of under control. So, you know, sleep deprivation is a really big one. And I know for me, sleep deprivation has been, I've suffered from sleep deprivation. I actually have insomnia. And when I am dealing with the insomnia, when I don't sleep well, I do notice that symptoms start to kind of creep up on me. So I have to be really mindful of my sleep and, you know, my schedules and things like that, so that I am staying in control of, I'm staying ahead of the illness and making sure that, you know, my lack of sleep isn't going to cause any problems later on. The use of medication, whether you use medication or you don't use medication, that's a possible trigger that could cause a manic episode. And alcohol use, again, this is not, you know, a situation where these things happen to me and this will happen to you and this will happen to the next person. Every situation, every case is different. So the way I may react to alcohol is different than the way the next person may react to alcohol. So alcohol use, in moderation or not at all, depends on the person, depends on the medication that they're using, depends on whether they're, you know, type 1 or type 2. It really depends on a bevy of factors. But it can play a part in whether or not, you know, a manic episode will occur. Drug use is also another thing that play a part in whether or not a manic episode will take place. And then this was something that I kind of threw into this list, was possible traumatic experiences or situations. Now I know that just from my experience and from all of the research that I've done, and just my own personal experience from over the years, I try to limit my exposure to situations that are going to be stressful, and that, you know, we can't always limit, we can't always predict what's going to come or the future. But so we don't know, we never know if something traumatic is going to happen, but we can limit our involvement in stressful situations and being around drama and being around things like that. So those kinds of situations can spark an episode, a manic episode. So when we limit and are mindful of our situations and surroundings, the situations that we put ourselves in and the surroundings that we're in, that is being proactive, and that is being is taking an active step in caring for, you know, yourself and your illness. So that is really that's a really big one, in terms of managing and minding your illness. So like I said, mania affects people differently. The illness affects people differently. The drugs affect people differently. It is all it all affects everyone differently. So, you know, I may, you know, break out into a fit of rage where the next person may not have that. So, I know that for me, when I had a really bad manic episode when before I was diagnosed, but this was really one of the telltale signs that, you know, my doctors were able to use as the determining factor that, you know, this is what I was dealing with, was the fact that I spent over $250,000. Now, this is something that I was not able to talk about because it was shameful to even utter those words that, yeah, you know, I just went on this mad spree of, you know, spending and, you know, doing all of this crazy outlandish stuff, quitting my job, and it was shameful to talk about. So I wasn't able to identify what was happening. I just thought that, you know, after my mother passed away, I was just kind of like, that was the grieving process, but that wasn't the grieving process. It was a manic episode. So that was a big indicator for my doctors to be able to identify that you fall into the category of bipolar disorder. And so that information for them was good to be able to diagnose me. So then I was able to, you know, eventually take the information and do what I needed to do with it, so that I was able to get to the point where I am now, where I'm in recovery. But of course it took, you know, several years to get to this place. But that episode, that time in my life was really important because it was able to identify what was actually happening with me. So that was one of the really big manic episodes that I had. And it, it was a really crazy time. It was a really crazy time for me. And I just thought that, you know, I just thought that I was just completely grieving, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. It just took 12 years to even get a diagnosis. So for 12 years, I was going through life, you know, with an undiagnosed illness, and I just did not know what was wrong with me. So I'm just glad that I was able to share that experience with doctors so that they were able to pinpoint and say, yeah, that was a mania episode. That was an episode of mania, and that is a classic symptom of bipolar disorder. So that was one scenario that I was involved in. And so the next one, which a lot of people don't talk about, is hypersexuality. And a lot of the women that I've spoken to, when they talk about hypersexuality, people people don't realize that hypersexuality is actually a symptom of bipolar disorder. People get labeled as promiscuous, or, you know, fast or loose, or, you know, whatever they want to call it, but that is actually a symptom of bipolar disorder. And when you're not diagnosed, you know, you're running around with this one and you're running around with that one, and you just think that, you know, I'm just, you know, just free. But once you have a diagnosis, you're able to, you get so many answers, because now you know why you spent so much money. Now you know why, you know, you have this insanely high, you know, sex drive, and you're doing all this crazy stuff. So even though it isn't something that people want to admit and want to talk about, having a diagnosis gives you the answers to so many questions, because then you're able to say, okay, this is why I did this is why I did that, this is why, you know, I just wanted to, you know, punch this person in the face for no reason. It gives you the answers to the questions that you need. It's almost like a mystery, but then once you get the diagnosis, you're able to understand yourself better and understand how the you're able to understand. This sounds like my story pre-diagnosis. Yes, exactly. It's so crazy because you think that you think that something's wrong with you, and it's not. There is a reason why you're behaving in this way. So it's totally it's totally it's great to finally get a name, to put a name to all of those things that you're doing. The loss of concentration. I remember one time, I had a shopping addiction, and so that's kind of where all the the $250,000 went. It was shopping, 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 and I could not concentrate for anything. So I remember one time I was in a store, and I actually felt like I needed a fix. I literally felt like I was addicted. I needed a fix. So I'm in the store talking to the salesperson, but she's talking to me and I can't concentrate. I'm not paying attention to what she is saying. I'm looking around the store and just taking everything in because I'm like, okay, what am I going to buy to satisfy this fix? And it literally was like my head was spinning. And then once I figured out what I was going to buy, then I was able to focus a little bit on what she was saying. So the mania will make you be in a place where you cannot concentrate. You are focused on getting that need met, and then you kind of worry about everything after that. So there was a lot of me not being able to focus and me not concentrating, and I just thought that I just thought I was just like a horrible person because I was doing so many things that were just like not, I wasn't engaged, I wasn't normal, and I just didn't know why. But once I got the diagnosis, I was able to put a name to a face and say, okay, these are the reasons why I'm acting this way, and this is the reason why I do this and why I do that. So the diagnosis is so important because it makes you feel, at least for me, it makes you feel like you're a little bit normal. It doesn't make you feel like you're abnormal, and it makes you feel like there's a chance for you to kind of right. I don't know if right the wrongs is a good way to say it, but fix some of the things that were not going the right way. Um, I know that for me, I know that for me, I used to do impulsive things and I used to do dangerous things, and I know reckless driving was another one of them. As I'm looking back, now I'm able to pinpoint all of these things, but I was actually a reckless driver, and I remember saying to myself, I'm probably going to die in a car accident because I was driving so recklessly. I was driving so recklessly that I just did not even, I knew that I was doing something wrong, but there was almost like this high or whatever that I got out of doing these terrible things, and I didn't kind of I don't want to say I didn't care, but I wasn't really concerned with the consequences of the reckless driving, the spending all the money. There was no concern for the consequences or the outcomes. It was kind of just like, I'm just gonna feed this need right now, and then I'll worry about everything later. So if I spend $200,000, I'll worry about not having money or not having this or not have. I'll worry about all that stuff later. So it kind of creates this like need now scenario for you, and then you have to pick up all the pieces once the mania is over, and then you're like, what have I done? So it's just not it's just not a good situation to be in, especially when you don't know what's going on. So when you know what's going on, you can kind of prepare yourself for what's to come, and you can also kind of stay 3 steps ahead of your brain and of your illness, so that when it does happen, you're already prepared for what's going to happen, and you know how your body or your brain reacts to certain things, so you can kind of be prepared and stay ready. um I would begin projects, like tons of projects. I would get ideas for things and I just thought that they were like the best thing ever. I'm going to start this business for this. I would start it, work on it, get a quarter way through, then I would stop it. I would start another business idea or another project. I would tell everybody about it. I would tell them, how awesome it was. I would go, a quarter way through, maybe a third way through. Then I would stop it. Then I would, come up with another idea for another thing and just start it. Maybe buy supplies, maybe, spend money on whatever it was to get me started, but then I would stop. So then I would just have tons and tons and tons of projects and businesses and, school and all kinds of shit that I started but never finished because I was in that phase of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, it's going to be so awesome, it's going to be so great, but then I would just never see it through. And people would look at me like I was a big old flake because I would always talk about how I'm gonna start this business to, I'm gonna start this modeling agency. I'm gonna start a business to do this. I'm gonna start a business to do that. Still suffering from rapid cycling. My mania embodies that. Let me collect passions, then ditch them. I don't know how to explain that. It was just me and not my mania. Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard to explain to people, but then it's also hard to process. Like, why do I keep doing this? Like, I remember one time I was like big into scrapbooking. I think I made one scrapbook, but I went out and bought all the scrapbooking stuff. I bought the scissors, the scissors that make like the little squiggly lines at the top of the pages. I bought like the little frames for the picture. Like, I went all out. I had like this whole scrapbooking set. I did one scrapbook and then I left it. There was a time when I like wanted to make jewelry. Again, I went and bought everything that I needed to, start making jewelry. I think I made maybe 2 or 3 pieces of jewelry, and then that was it. I went back to school for 1 semester, realized that, that wasn't the thing for me. And then there are so many unfinished projects. I'm laughing because I bought crafts to try and sell flower crowns and never sold more than like 2 to friends. I know, it's like completely, I totally get it because like every month I was coming up with like a new thing. And I know people who were listening to me were like, you know what, you need to get your life together because you're just a mess. And I probably did sound like I was a mess. But again, I didn't have a name to, okay, this is part of the mania. This is a reason why I'm doing all this stuff. But finally, once I did like some research and started to learn about it, I'm like, oh, okay, this is why I do this. So now I'm able to say, no, I'm not going to, go out and, I don't know, start making flower crowns and then just get bored with it, next week. So there's a reason why we start things and we don't finish them. It's the mania. I think that also the mania for me I'm like a recovering perfectionist. So when I would start these projects, the mania and the perfectionism were overlapping, and I would make these scrapbooks, but they weren't perfect enough to show to people, and it just all just became too much, and I just thought I was just a hot mess. But I didn't know that there was a reason why I was doing all this stuff. It was because of the mania. So the mania can be so difficult to deal with, especially when you don't know what you're dealing with. I mean, it's endless. There have been so many businesses that I've wanted to start. There have been so many projects that I've wanted to start. There have been so many things that, I started to work on and then I stopped working on it because I would come out of the mania and then I would just be on to something else. But now that I know what it is, I can prepare myself for that. And I can also stop myself and really evaluate, okay, is this something that I really want to do? Or am I doing this because I'm going through a manic episode or I'm going into a manic episode? So the ways that I'm able to keep my mania under control, I mean, again, like I said, everyone is different and everybody will control their symptoms and their illness differently. But what has worked for me are therapy. Talk therapy has worked for me. Finding a really good therapist who understands the illness and understand how it affects me has been really good. In keeping the appointments, because that's another thing. Making the appointments and not going is not going to help. Making the appointments and going on a consistent basis has been really helpful so that I can identify how I'm feeling and if I feel like I'm, slipping into a depression or if I'm slipping into like a manic episode. So that's one of the ways that I'm able to kind of keep the mania under control. Taking the medication that I've been prescribed on a consistent basis, because when I don't take my medication, I go into that, I'm going to do this, 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 I'm going to do, I have like 35 things that I want to do, and then I overwhelm myself, and then I don't get anything done. And I have a friend who knows all about it because that happened to me a couple weeks ago. So taking the medication, again, medication is a very personal thing. Some people have to take medicine. They think it's the right thing for them, and then other people don't want to. I mean, it's all very personal. It's all, what you decide, with your healthcare team, and, it's all very personal. But taking medication for me has been very helpful. Self-acceptance, I think, is a big one, because you have to accept what you're dealing with in order to work on it and get the results that you want. If I was still in a place of denial, I would still be going through these manic episodes and starting like 35 projects and not finishing them. But how can you cope with the distracted passions and high expectations? I take medication, but I'm still figuring out sleep and other triggers. I think that self-acceptance, that's a good one. Yeah. I still struggle with sleep. So I think figuring out the sleep is probably maybe the first thing you want to tackle, figuring out your sleep. And then actually triggers is on my list. So I'll get to that right now. So learning the triggers, I didn't know what my triggers were when I started therapy. I did not know what my triggers were. And I kind of said to my therapist, like, well, what are my triggers? And she was like, I don't know what your triggers are. You have to figure out what your triggers are. So being mindful and paying attention to yourself in different situations, different scenarios, around different people, and paying attention to how you feel when you're in those situations will give you indicators of what your triggers are. Like, I can give you one example. Loud music, like very loud, intimidating music is I can't deal with it. That's a trigger for me. So I didn't pay attention to this stuff over the years. So, if I was in a situation with loud music and people that talked really loud, I was being triggered and did not know it. So self-acceptance, self self-awareness really helps you discover what your triggers are, because you have to start paying attention to yourself and start listening to yourself, and you'll figure out what your triggers are eventually, but you have to pay attention to how you're feeling when you're placed in certain situations. So that's really how you get to that point, in figuring out your triggers. But the sleep and figuring out the triggers are, I think, maybe really good ones. And then you said distracted passions and high expectations. Now, high expectations, are they from yourself or are they from other people? That would be a good question to answer. What are the high who do the high expectations come from? Are you placing these high expectations on yourself, or is someone else placing these high expectations on you? So that would be a good question to answer. Um, Also, in terms of that, keeping the mania and basically the whole um, illness under control is being mindful. So, being mindful, I know, and people talk about mindful all the time. And I thought that it was just a gimmick, but it really is true. Figuring out, paying attention to yourself. How do you react when you're in certain situations? How do you react? How do you feel when you're around certain people? How do you react? How do you feel when you're around certain personalities? These are all things that will give you some of the answers to the questions that you need. I know that financial instability is a trigger for me. So what do? I have to do things to ensure that my finances are in order, that I know, how much money I have, and not to spend any money until I make sure all of my expenses and bills are taken care of, because that takes me back to the time when I spent, $200,000 and didn't know what was going to be the next step for me. So, but that took some time for me to figure out, you know what I mean? So these are things that are going to take some time to figure out, but if you sit and you think and you listen to yourself and you pay attention to how you're feeling, these are the things that are going to help you move forward and be able to manage your illness in a more effective way. Um the last thing that I have on my list of how to keep your mania and basically the whole illness under control is staying away from possible traumatic situations. Now, I know that may sound like impossible, but we can't control everything that happens, but we can control some of the things that happens. We can control where we go. We can control who we're around. I mean, if you have a friend who is always getting into trouble, maybe you want to limit your interaction with that friend. If you know that friend is a troublemaker and gets into fights and arguments and stuff like that, maybe you want to limit your FaceTime with that person. Maybe you want to talk to that person on the phone and not go out in person and go out to bars with that person. So it's things like that. Just learning how to ensure that you're going to be as mentally healthy as possible, and making sure that the outside, your external surroundings match up with that. But again, like I said, these things take time, and they also, some of these answers are going to come from you, and your therapist is not going to be able to give you these answers. Your therapist will be able to guide you, but you are going to have to put in the work and figure out what some of these triggers are, and some of these things that you have decided or you feel are not good for you. So that's pretty much it in terms of mania. I really felt like I wanted to talk about mania because that's another part of bipolar disorder. People talk about depression a lot, but I don't think we talk about the other side. of bipolar, which is the mania and the up and the, not sleeping for days, and it gives you a perspective on the illness, because it almost is like it's you're almost like two different people. When you're depressed, you're really, really, really sad and down and low, and then when you're manic, you're like really up, 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 and high and excited and all over the place. So I just wanted to, give that perspective. So thank you guys so much for joining me. And thank you to everyone who catches the replay. Hopefully, I will be able to save this video so I can put it on IGTV. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. And right now, I think that's it. The other thing I did want to mention is I think next week I'm going to be going live for the last week in Mental Health Awareness Month. And I'm going to be discussing, which I kind of talked about this last night with Simply Tori, but I'm going to talk about the things that I've learned about myself in discovering my mental health disorder. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys again next week. Good night.